You are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Carl Jung. Think about the last time someone's words or actions instantly lit a fire inside you. Maybe it was an insult, a careless remark, or even a small slight that kept replaying in your mind. In those moments, it feels like the other person holds the strings to your emotions. But what if you could cut those strings for good? What if anger and hurt could no longer take root in you, no matter what anyone says or does? This is not about suppressing how you feel, but about understanding what lies beneath every emotional reaction, seeing the mirror life holds up, and reclaiming the calm that is already yours. Carl Jung believed that the things which disturb us the most are often reflections of what we have yet to face within ourselves. If this resonates with you, subscribe and like to support the channel so we can keep exploring truths that set you free. Anger is not a reaction. It is a reflection. According to Carl Jung, within each person lives a shadow, the bundle of traits, desires, and emotions we were taught to reject, deny, or fear in ourselves. The moments you feel an intense surge of irritation or hurt, especially towards someone else's arrogance, vanity, or selfishness, are often the moments you're staring directly at your own disowned parts. It might be a quality you once expressed but was shamed for, something you secretly wished you could embody, or a need you buried long ago. Jung called this process projection, the unconscious act of placing what we don't want to face within ourselves onto others, convincing ourselves the problem is out there when it is actually rooted inside. You may think you're angry because of who they are, but you're really reacting to what they awaken in you. Consider a familiar scene. A colleague receives praise in front of everyone. You've been working just as hard, maybe harder, yet your name isn't mentioned. That tightness in your chest, the rush of heat behind your face, the inner voice insisting it's unfair, this is the shadow at work. The recognition they received touched the unspoken part of you that longs for acknowledgement, the part you've been taught to suppress or dismiss. And because that longing feels dangerous to admit, you push it away and instead frame them as the problem. You might tell yourself they don't deserve it, that they must have manipulated their way into the spotlight. But underneath the story, the truth is simpler and more vulnerable. You wanted to feel seen too. This is where emotional reactivity begins to loosen its grip. When you stop asking, why are they like that? And start asking, what is this showing me about myself? You step into a level of self-awareness psychology that shifts everything. The goal is not to shame yourself for having a shadow, nor to suppress what you find there. The goal is to integrate it, to bring it into the light so it no longer controls you from the dark. This is the essence of mastering emotional control. Not detaching in a cold, indifferent way, but creating enough inner space to respond instead of react. In today's world, where the pace of life is relentless and the social pressure to perform is constant, triggers are everywhere. A comment online can ruin your mood for hours. A stranger cutting you off in traffic can spark a chain of overthinking versus critical thinking, leaving you stewing in frustration long after the moment has passed. When you live in this constant state of emotional reactivity, you hand over your peace to anyone and anything. The more you rely on others to behave correctly so you can feel calm, the more fragile your inner peace becomes. But when you realize you are reacting to your own projections, you begin to reclaim that power. This realization opens a new path, one where insults, slights, and disappointments become mirrors rather than wounds. Here is where Jung diverges from the Stoic approach. Stoicism tells you to be indifferent to insults because you cannot control others. It's a practical method for reducing unnecessary suffering, but it stops at the surface. Jung invites you to go deeper, to treat the insult as a message from within. If someone's arrogance triggers you, perhaps you've denied your own need to assert yourself. If someone's selfishness enrages you, perhaps you've neglected your own boundaries. Instead of building a wall around your emotions, You turn toward them and ask, "What are you here to teach me?" In doing so, you dissolve the very hooks that others might use to pull you into conflict. The more you practice this, the less dependent your calm becomes on perfect conditions. You start noticing the early signs of being triggered, the quickening breath, the tightening jaw, the rush of thoughts preparing a defense. And in that pause, you remember, you're not at the mercy of what just happened. You're at the center of how you choose to interpret it. Emotional detachment techniques are not about numbing yourself. They're about stepping far enough back to see the pattern, to catch the projection in motion, and to choose a response aligned with your values. The question shifts from, "How do I make them stop?" to, "How do I stop giving them control?" You may still feel the sting of unfairness or the flash of irritation, but it doesn't own you anymore. By meeting your shadow with curiosity rather than judgment, you dissolve the cycle that kept you reacting the same way for years. This is how you build true self-control. Not by ignoring your feelings, but by listening to them until they tell you the truth. And once you know that truth, no one else gets to decide your peace. It stops being something fragile that can be stolen with a word, a look, or a gesture, and becomes something anchored deep within you. The moment you see clearly where your reactions come from, you stop living as if the outside world holds the keys to your emotional state. Triggers may still appear, but they lose their sharpness, like arrows striking armor that no longer cracks. You stand rooted, even as the wind of someone else's mood, judgment, or carelessness brushes past you. From here, another door opens toward a deeper recognition that will change not only how you deal with anger, but how you relate to every feeling you have. Your emotions are not enemies. They are not wild animals to be caged or storms to be avoided. They are signals, messengers carrying vital information about you. Marshall Rosenberg, the creator of nonviolent communication, understood this with striking clarity. He taught that every negative emotion is a signal pointing toward a need that has not been met. Anger, sadness, frustration, these are not random fires. They are lamps lighting up the places inside you that have gone dark from neglect. When you feel a wave of anger, the natural instinct is to search for who is at fault, to fixate on the person or situation that triggered you. But the more transformative question, the one that shifts your relationship with yourself, is, what need of mine is hurting right now? This simple shift changes everything. Instead of turning outward to attack or to justify, you turn inward to listen. You begin to see anger not as a dangerous intruder, but as a guide. It comes to tell you something important is missing, and it matters enough for you to notice. Imagine, for example, that you feel overlooked when your friends don't check in on you. You might first interpret that as irritation toward them, maybe even judgment. But if you listen more closely, you may find that beneath the heat of anger is the cool ache of sadness. What you truly feel is the sting of disconnection. Your need for warmth, for belonging, for being remembered, has been left unfulfilled. The anger was just the outer shell protecting a softer truth. Here is where Rosenberg's work intersects beautifully with Jung's. Rosenberg helps you locate the unmet need in the present moment, what you are craving right now. Jung invites you to look deeper, to trace that thread into the past. Often, the needs we struggle to name as adults are the same ones we learned long ago were unsafe or unworthy to express. Maybe as a child, you learned that asking for attention was selfish, or that showing vulnerability would only lead to rejection. Over time, you push those needs into the shadows. Yet when a present situation touches that same nerve, it feels sharper because it is pressing against an old wound. This is why certain comments or actions seem to ignite a bigger reaction than the moment warrants, because they are not only about now. When you understand this, your whole posture toward emotion changes. You stop trying to erase or suppress the feeling because you recognize it as a part of you that is asking to be acknowledged. You also stop expecting others to instinctively meet your needs, because you know that no one can read what you have not even dared to voice. Instead, you begin to meet yourself where you are, to name your needs, to honor them, and to take responsibility for them without guilt. This is the deeper work of emotional detachment techniques. It is not cold withdrawal, but the warm clarity that comes when you can witness your own inner state without being consumed by it. It is the practice of listening to the messenger without shooting it down, of asking, is this truly about what just happened? Or is it about something I've carried for far too long? In that moment of awareness, the grip of emotional reactivity loosens. Integrating Rosenberg's insight with Jung's shadow work creates a path that is both compassionate and profound. You learn to address the immediate need, so the present moment can heal, while also tracing the roots of the pain so the same trigger will not hold power over you again. This is not about perfection, it is about wholeness. And wholeness dissolves the hooks that once kept you reacting. It allows you to meet the world without the constant fear of being hurt, because you have learned to meet yourself first. From that grounded place, the world stops feeling like a battlefield of personal attacks and becomes more like a vast, shifting landscape, sometimes rough, sometimes gentle, through which you can move without losing your center. And here lies another truth that can transform your emotional life. You're not reacting to other people. You're reacting to the story you tell yourself about them. Albert Ellis, the father of rational emotive behavior therapy, understood this with surgical clarity. He saw that it is rarely the raw event itself that wounds you. It is the interpretation you give it, the meaning you attach to it, the private narrative running in the background of your mind. If someone calls you irresponsible, the sound of those words is just air moving through space. But if those words land on the soil of a belief like, I must always be competent to be worthy, or I am only valuable when I am praised, they sprout into pain almost instantly. Your reaction is not to the sentence, it is to the invisible belief you've been carrying, perhaps for years, without question. This is why two people can experience the same comment in entirely different ways. One shrugs and moves on, while the other feels gutted. The difference lies not in the stimulus, but in the mental frame that catches it. When you begin to see this, your emotional reactivity stops feeling inevitable. You realize there is a space between what happens and what you decide it means, and in that space lies your freedom. The beliefs Ellis called irrational often sound reasonable in your own head. Things like, people should treat me fairly, or I must succeed at what I do. But when treated as absolute truths, they set you up for constant frustration because life refuses to obey them. And so, every unmet expectation becomes a wound, and every wound feeds the belief further. The cycle turns endlessly unless you bring it into the light. This is where Jung's work and Ellis's intersect. Ellis invites you to challenge the belief directly, to test it against reality, and replace it with something more flexible, more aligned with the truth of how the world actually works. Jung invites you to trace the roots of that belief into the deep soil of your unconscious, where the original seed was planted, often in childhood, often in moments you barely remember. Maybe you learned, without words, that love had to be earned through achievement. Maybe criticism was more than feedback. It was a sign that affection would be withdrawn. Over time, these early imprints harden into the silent laws you live by, shaping every reaction without your consent. When you work only at the surface level, you may replace one thought with another, but the hidden wound still bleeds. When you combine the precision of Ellis with the depth of Jung, you are no longer just changing your thoughts. You are healing the place from which they grow. This is not about denying that hurtful things happen. People can be careless, cruel, or blind to your feelings. But if you allow your sense of worth to be determined by their words or actions, you hand over your peace like a gift they did not even ask for. Understanding that you react to your story, not the event, puts that peace back in your hands. You begin to ask, whenever you feel the first spark of anger or shame, what am I telling myself right now, and is it the only truth? That question alone can open a window where before there was only a locked door. With practice, you find that the same situations that once left you shaken now leave you curious. The story loses its grip, and the world no longer has the same power to pull you out of yourself. In that quiet strength, you live not in denial of reality, but in mastery of your own meaning-making. And from there, no one else gets to write your story for you. But even when you hold the pen of your own narrative, there is still one more subtle trap that can quietly pull you back into reactivity. The fragile walls of the ego. Carl Jung saw the ego not as your true self, but as the carefully constructed image you present to the world, the version of you that feels competent, admirable, intelligent, respectable, lovable. It is the mask you learn to wear to survive and belong. Every time someone insults you, rejects you, or disregards you, the part that flinches is rarely your deeper self. It is the image you have been protecting, sometimes for decades. Eckhart Tolle calls this the pain of the ego, the inner contraction that happens when your sense of identity is entangled with thoughts, roles, titles, or social standing. You feel attacked because the story you tell about who you are feels under threat. Imagine standing in a meeting and being criticized in front of your peers. The heat that rises in your chest, the quickening of your breath, the tight knot in your stomach. These are not simply the body's reactions to words. They are the echo of an ego defending its territory, terrified that a crack in its armor will expose something unworthy underneath. The deeper truth is that your real self, your awareness, your consciousness, remains untouched by insult. The sting comes only when you have fused your worth with something that can be taken away. This is why anger can be such a precise teacher. It points you toward the exact places where you are still identified with the fragile. If you can see this, you can begin to step back and observe, rather than collapse into the story. This is where Jung and Tolle meet. Jung guides you to explore the origins of your ego, the childhood shaping, the cultural conditioning, the moments when certain traits became part of your survival strategy. He invites you to understand why you cling to them so fiercely. Tolle, on the other hand, offers the immediate practice. Return to the present moment, feel the reaction in your body, and watch it without judgment. In doing so, you interrupt the automatic cycle of defense and counterattack. You begin to realize that the ego is not the enemy. It is simply a structure you have mistaken for the whole of you. And when you no longer identify entirely with it, criticism loses its power to wound in the same way. You can listen without collapsing. You can disagree without needing to destroy the other person. You can stand in your truth without the constant need to protect a fragile image. This is not about becoming passive or indifferent. It is about acting from a place that is no longer chained to the fear of ego death. The next time anger surges because someone questioned your intelligence, beauty, competence, or kindness, pause long enough to ask, what part of me is feeling threatened? Is it my true self, or is it the mask I've been wearing? That question alone can open a space big enough to choose a different response. In that space, you begin to live less as a hostage of your own self-image and more as the steady witness of all your changing roles. And when you stand in that awareness, no insult, no rejection, and no misunderstanding has the power to shake the ground beneath your feet. But Jung would remind you that awareness alone is not the final step. If you want to not only resist the storms, but walk through them with steady eyes and an open heart, you must go beyond simply seeing your patterns. You must integrate what you see. Many imagine that inner peace means the absence of strong emotion, as if enlightenment were a spotless white room where nothing stirs. That is not peace. That is numbness wearing a mask of calm. True freedom is not built by silencing your anger or locking away your jealousy. It is forged in the willingness to step into the dimly lit places of your own psyche, to sit with the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, and to listen. This is the work of individuation, uniting the conscious I you show to the world with the vast, uncharted self beneath it. And in that hidden territory live the fragments you once exiled, the times you swallowed rage to keep the peace, the desires you buried because they felt dangerous, the envy you disguised behind polite smiles. They have not vanished. They are waiting, like neglected children, for you to claim them. Imagine someone raised to believe that anger was shameful. As an adult, they pride themselves on being calm and reasonable. Outwardly, they seem unshakable. But beneath the surface, unexpressed anger builds like steam in a sealed vessel. It leaks through sarcasm, passive aggression, or quiet resentment. Sometimes it turns inward, curdling into depression or anxiety. This is the cost of suppression. What you refuse to face will find a way to speak, and it will often speak in the language of harm. Integration demands more courage than repression. It asks you to say, yes, I am capable of anger. Yes, there is envy in me. Yes, there are desires I have denied. Instead of pushing these truths away, you bring them to the table. You ask what they want you to know. Anger might be pointing to a boundary you have let others cross. Envy might be showing you a part of life you yearn to experience. Desire might be urging you toward a path you have been too afraid to follow. When you treat these emotions as messengers instead of enemies, they transform. They stop knocking the walls down to get your attention. They start guiding you toward wholeness. A person who has learned this no longer fears feeling deeply. They can stand in the heat of their own emotions without being consumed, because they are no longer fighting themselves. Anger, when integrated, becomes clarity about what matters. Envy becomes inspiration to grow. Desire becomes energy to create. You still feel them, but they flow through you cleanly, without the distortion of shame or denial. This is why individuation is not about erasing your shadow, but embracing it. When you are no longer afraid of what lives inside you, the world outside loses much of its power to wound you. You stop walking through life like a fragile glass, terrified of cracks. You become more like a river, capable of holding calm surfaces and fierce currents, and knowing both are part of the same depth. And here lies the paradox. Once you integrate what you once rejected, you become less reactive, not more. People often fear that accepting their anger will make them lash out, or that acknowledging their jealousy will make them bitter. In truth, the opposite happens. Suppression feeds reactivity. Integration dissolves it. The parts of you that once hijacked your behavior are now seen, understood, and given a rightful place within the whole. You cannot control who will try to provoke you, but you can remove the hooks they might catch. That is the gift of integration. It is not that you stop feeling, it is that you stop being ruled by what you feel. And when that happens, you meet life without flinching, knowing that nothing within you is a stranger anymore. You have gathered your scattered pieces. You are no longer hiding from yourself. And so, you no longer need to hide from the world. But there is one more threshold you must cross if you truly want to live beyond the reach of anger and turmoil. The space between what happens and how you respond. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who endured the unspeakable horrors of Nazi concentration camps, once wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." This is not just poetic wisdom, it is a map to liberation. Life will always deliver events you cannot control, harsh words, sudden losses, injustices that cut deep. But inside you, there remains a sliver of ground no one else can touch unless you hand them the key. That ground is choice. Frankl's insight does not deny the force of instinct. It simply reveals that you are more than instinct. Anger, fear, and defensiveness may rise up like waves, but the space he speaks of is the shore where you decide whether to let those waves pull you under. Jung would add that this choice is not possible without self-awareness, because without it, the parts of you hidden in shadow will react in your place. That is why so many find themselves saying and doing things they regret. Because they were not the ones truly choosing, their unexamined wounds were. Imagine someone shouting at you in public, their voice sharp, their words unfair. The reflex may be to snap back, to protect your pride, to make them feel the sting they've given you. That is the automatic reaction, the one wired by habit, ego, and unresolved pain. But in the space Frankl describes, another possibility appears. You feel the surge in your chest, you notice the tension in your jaw, and instead of firing back, you step into that pause. You ask yourself, what value am I protecting right now? Do I need to defend my dignity with anger, or can I hold it in stillness? That single breath becomes a turning point, not just in that moment, but in who you are becoming. The truth is, you are never obligated to hand over your calm to anyone. Anger may try to convince you otherwise, whispering that you must react to prove your strength or preserve your worth. But in reality, the most unshakable strength is the ability to hold your ground without striking back. This is not passivity, it is mastery. It is choosing your action instead of being driven by your reaction. That choice point, that small quiet gap, is where maturity is born. It is also where the work you have done with Jung's insights becomes invaluable. By integrating your shadow, you clear away the unconscious triggers that once hijacked your behavior. By recognizing the voice of your ego, you avoid confusing temporary offense with true harm. By listening to your unmet needs, as Rosenberg teaches, you can respond in a way that addresses the root rather than the surface. All of this unfolds in that sacred space between stimulus and response. Think of it as a doorway you carry within you everywhere. Most people rush through it without noticing, propelled by emotion and habit. But you can learn to linger there, to look both ways, to decide which direction truly serves you. Sometimes the choice will be silence, sometimes it will be words, but one's born of clarity rather than impulse. Either way, you remain the one steering your life. In time, this practice reshapes you. You stop living like a puppet whose strings are pulled by the moods and actions of others. You begin to move from a deeper rhythm, one set by your values, your vision, your grounded self. The world will still be loud, unpredictable, and often unjust, but your inner world becomes steady, like a flame that bends with the wind yet does not go out. And in that steadiness, you discover what Frankl promised. Growth and freedom are not gifts the world can give or take. They are choices you make, moment by moment, in the space only you can guard. And when you live from that space, something profound happens. You become untouchable. Not because life stops testing you, but because there is nothing left inside you that can be weaponized against you. When you know yourself fully, no one can control you. The old wounds that once made you bleed at the slightest touch are healed. The shadow parts you once disowned are no longer lurking in the dark, waiting to be triggered. The irrational beliefs that used to dictate your reactions have lost their grip. People can still speak carelessly, act rudely, or misunderstand you, but they no longer have the power to stir chaos within you, because you no longer meet them from a place of unhealed pain. Carl Jung would call this the integration of the self, when all the fragments of who you are have been acknowledged and accepted. Stoic philosophy frames it as inner fortitude, knowing that nothing external can truly harm you unless you consent to it. Mindfulness adds the living practice of awareness, remaining anchored in the present so you can respond with clarity rather than compulsion. Together, these perspectives form a shield that is not about resistance, but about transparency. Insults pass through you because they have nothing to stick to. Imagine someone hurling an accusation at you, their words sharp and dripping with intent to provoke. In the past, you might have felt the rush of heat in your chest, the impulse to defend or retaliate. Now you simply listen, not as a passive victim, but as someone who sees clearly. Their words belong to them, not to you. You may choose to respond, or you may choose to walk away, but whichever you choose, it is your decision, not your reflex. You are no longer a puppet pulled by invisible strings of ego, fear, or longing for validation. This is not about becoming numb. It is not about suppressing your humanity in the name of strength. It is about cultivating such a deep understanding of yourself that no interaction can shake the foundation you stand on. Your calm is no longer the fragile stillness of someone holding their breath. It is the steady presence of someone who can breathe through any storm. And here lies the paradox. When you are no longer afraid of being hurt, you actually become more open. You can meet people without the armor of suspicion or the shield of defensiveness because you know that their behavior cannot define you. Your worth is no longer up for negotiation in every conversation. Your sense of peace is not something they can grant or take away. It is something you carry. Over time, this way of living changes not only how you feel, but how the world responds to you. People sense that you are not easily provoked, and so they stop trying. You become a steady presence in rooms full of chaos. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight because they are not spoken from insecurity or reactivity. They are spoken from choice. The ultimate truth is this: no one has the right to hurt you unless you hand them that right. And when you truly know yourself, you stop giving away that power. The peace you feel is not borrowed, it is owned. And from that ownership comes a quiet, unshakable freedom. You no longer live at the mercy of other people's moods, actions, or opinions. You are free to engage, to care, to love, without fear of losing yourself in the process. Because once you know yourself, you are not just free from the control of others. You are finally free to live as you were meant to live. At the heart of everything we've explored today is one unshakable truth. Your anger is never just about the world outside. It is a reflection of the world within. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow you deny will speak through your reactions. Marshall Rosenberg reminded us that every emotion, even anger, is a signal of an unmet need. Albert Ellis showed us that you don't react to reality, but to the story you tell yourself about it. From Jung to Eckhart Tolle, from Viktor Frankl to the wisdom of mindfulness, the path has been the same. Know yourself, and you will no longer be ruled by the unconscious forces that once controlled you. You now have the tools to recognize projection when it happens, to pause in the gap between stimulus and response, and to meet your emotions not as enemies, but as teachers. When you stop suppressing and start integrating, you stop living at the mercy of other people's words, moods, or judgments. The journey of self-awareness psychology is not about perfection, it's about presence. Here's one simple, powerful practice. The next time you feel triggered, don't rush to react. Instead, place your hand on your chest, breathe slowly and ask, what part of me is speaking right now? This small act interrupts mental slavery psychology and opens the door to real freedom. If something in today's reflection resonated with you, share your own experience in the comments. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And if you want more content on how to reconnect with your inner voice and escape the patterns that hold you back, make sure to subscribe and join this community of self-discovery. Remember, when you understand yourself, no one else gets to decide your peace.